Good evening. Welcome to the Warrant Committee. We're back. Thank everyone for attending. The purpose of tonight, as we go into the special town meeting this fall in December, I think the purpose of tonight is, if you will, just sort of fire up the boilers, get up some steam. So when it's time for us to get underway and really get down to business, we're able to do so. So I've asked, and we are very pleased to have with us tonight, we have Mr. Zulus, the chair of the select board. We have Nick, the town administrator, to present, if you will. And I asked it to be sort of informally, to present, if you will, of the articles for the warrant for the special. We have some really awesome ones, specifically MBTA zoning. Generally, with regards to that, we can have, its discussion is on the agenda for that tonight, but it is very premature for us to deal with that substantively for a vote. I'd like to encourage everyone to watch or attend. There's a public forum, the MBTA communities zoning, tomorrow. Okay. Planning board is taking up the issue on Thursday. So that is developing. That's super important. And so again, with regards to that, we've asked for an overview to see where we're at now. I expect tonight that we will discuss and we could entertain a vote on articles with regards to the purchase of a wood chipper for the DPW, something we could do. Okay, but otherwise, it's an overview to sort of, test the waters, get our feet wet, if you will, okay? So, so there we go. So I'd like to recognize at this time, Mr. Zulus and Mr. Milano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you have on your agenda tonight, and something that we've been working on with a couple other committees in town, is a replacement of the DPW's wood chipper. It's a piece of equipment that I'll let Chase Berkeley, DPW director, describe in much more detail than I could, beyond that it chips pieces of wood. And he'll go through the issues that we faced with the current one, why we're looking at a request to replace it now. Just process-wise, so members of the committee understand, we have what's called a reserve fund. It's approved every year at the annual town meeting. In your warrant, it sets aside in fiscal 24 $250,000 that can be used for extraordinary and unanticipated expenses. It can be accessed with approval from this body. The warrant committee in Milton, or the finance committee in most cities and towns, have control over what's referred to as the reserve fund. Typically, we like to hold these until the end of the fiscal year when we know where our budgets stand. In this case, this is one fairly unusual, I would say, that we are bringing forward at this stage in the fiscal year. So the request before this committee would be to approve reserve fund transfer to purchase a replacement wood chipper for the Department of Public Works that would draw down the reserve fund by approximately $110,000. So from $250 to $140. My math is good there. And then the second step of that is something we're working on for the town meeting, which is an article to amend our appropriations for this fiscal year to increase the reserve fund back. Basically, when we closed out fiscal year 23, and as we could see as we progressed through the year, our interest income in our bank accounts was outpacing where our expectations had been. So we anticipate to have more revenue in that specific account in fiscal 24. And as a result, we're recommending to the town meeting that town meeting increase its appropriations for the year by that amount. We're anticipating about $350,000 more than we had figured at the first place. And that money, rather than go to a town department, the school department, for example, or another town department for operating expenses, we're recommending we put it in the reserve fund. And then that would be used throughout the year if necessary for unanticipated expenses. So that's the finance side of what the request is. The specific request tonight is the approval of the reserve fund transfer. In December, the request to town meeting will be to amend the fiscal 24 budget appropriations to increase the appropriation to the reserve fund. So that's the finance side. I'll let Chase, if you could jump in and just talk about the need, the equipment, and why we're here today.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Milano. Can everyone hear me okay?
Chase, hang on. We're muted in the room here.
Ready when you are, just let me know.
Good to go.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Milano. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for expediting this request for us at the DPW. So there's nothing complicated about this. This is our primary wood chipper that suffered a catastrophic engine failure. We purchased it in 2018. And unfortunately, we've had a number of issues that have required somewhat extensive repairs on this piece of equipment. And the latest one being that the engine blew. So looking at the cost to replace the engine versus what it would cost us to buy a new unit, being such a critical one to our equipment fleet. The chipper goes out every day, just about 5 days a week, and also during emergencies, and saved us a tremendous amount of money as opposed to having a contractor's work out, and also expedites our response when we have wind emergencies or fallen trees and limbs. We can prioritize that immediately. So the quote that we received is an exact figure. It's pre-procured through a process or a membership that we have, which is called Sourcewell. So it's already been publicly bid. We know the number, and the amount is what it is. So the idea is to trade in our old unit that has an engine that's no longer usable and purchase a new one. It is readily available, so we can get this equipment as soon as we're able to purchase it if everything goes through.
So, Chair, that's what we had. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
I've got a question. I mean, so this old wood chipper lasted 5 years. I don't know anything about anything, but that sounds pretty short. Do we expect a wood chipper to last longer than that, or can you speak to that?
Absolutely, yeah, and you're 100% correct. We were very disappointed that we got only a 5-year lifespan out of this. The backup chipper that we're using now is 20 years old, by way of comparison. We believe that part of the reasoning for the short lifespan is that this was a newer model that used a gasoline engine. Traditionally, chippers have been diesel, but the industry has tried to move away from diesel because there's a number of new emission requirements with diesel engines that complicate using them, especially on equipment that isn't a vehicle. So it's a newer style. It hasn't been time tested like some of the older chippers that use diesel engines. The quote that we're seeking is to go back to a diesel engine, which is more expensive, but we'd like to have that reliability. We've made a number of expensive repairs already to this chipper, and in discussing what we've had to do to it with the manufacturer and the manufacturer's rep, there's no viable confidence that we can get from them that we won't continue to have issues with this model. So we believe it's in the best interest to just cut ties at this point and replace it. And just to give you a sense of numbers, because we're a budget committee here, right? It cost about $65,000 new 5 years ago. It's got 5 years of wear and tear on it. And the engine replacement is about $22,000 just to get a new engine on it.
Chase, how much are they giving you on the trade?
$7,500 is the trade-in value for the rest of it without the engine.
Were there any warranty options with the manufacturer, or is that expired?
At this point, there's no warranty on it left. No, yeah, I don't, we could look into a longer term warranty for the newer machine, but that's probably likely isn't part of the public bid quote, something like about 5 to 7 years. And when you're dealing with, so the engine, there's several engine manufacturing options on a wood chipper. So you can get a John Deere, you can get a Cat, and they offer different packages. So it's something we could definitely look into for this purchase. We might need to amend the amount though, or fund it through a different source if that's the case. Typically on a piece of equipment like this, the long-term warranties aren't really popular with the manufacturers, just because they take such a beating just from the nature of the work. They just don't offer the same type of warranty you'd see on like a vehicle per se.
Got it.
Any other questions? Would we like to have a discussion?
Yeah, I have a question, not about the wood chipper, but about the finances.
Yeah.
So, I just, after a year, I still have a lot of ignorance around how our town budget works. So last spring, we set up a town budget with a certain assumption for revenue. And now we're changing it. It just feels a little too easy to me to say, oh, let's change. I mean, we always took the revenue number as this is handed down to us as a number. In what circumstances at this point can we change our revenue estimate or not?
So until the tax rate is set, and that typically happens at the end of November, early December, we can really mess with the revenues, for lack of a better description. If we wanted, we could say our local receipts will be zero, for example. Obviously, we're not going to do that, but we have that opportunity to continually evaluate what our assumptions were. And if we feel like we were missing something, then we have the opportunity through town meeting to act and make an improvement or make a change or make an adjustment. If you think about cities can do this at city council, and that can happen within 2 weeks. First, for a town, requires a town meeting vote to amend the budget. It's a much longer process. So we really have 2 opportunities to set the budget in May. And then if there's a fall town meeting, if we want to make adjustments as we go. This is something we did do last year, if you'll recall. We made a very similar adjustment to the reserve fund in fiscal 23. And that was because what had happened last year was the state took forever to set their own budget. When they finally set and approved their budget, I think it might have been August or even September. It was really late in the process. Unexpectedly, they really increased state aid. And so Milton received, it was $368,000 more in state aid than we set in our budget in May. So rather than just leave that alone, we made an adjustment to increase it to the reserve fund. In this case, where we don't want to get too excited about interest income, because it's due to a couple of factors. Fed keeps raising rates, says rates are going to be high for another year. So we have pretty good confidence that the rates that we've been getting will stay where they are. We have also more money right now in our accounts than we typically do. We have an influx of federal funds that we don't normally have sitting around. We are earning interest on those funds until they're expended. We had a higher fund balance than typical, if you'll remember the free cash figure that we had of $4.4 million. So there's different factors that we didn't feel extremely confident in May to go much beyond, which is normal. But now, having seen all the results, having seen the first few months rather of interest income so far this year, we feel pretty confident that these adjustments are good. And again, I think the point is to appropriate to the reserve fund rather than kind of change horses midstream and start investing in things in the operating budget, rather than set it in the reserve fund, where if we don't use it, it closes out and becomes part of the next year free cash.
Thanks. That helped, except what you said at the beginning, which was until we set the tax rate in November. What? I mean, first of all, town meeting will be after that.
Correct.
Second of all, I didn't get the connection between setting the tax rate in November and everything else you said.
So our budget is based on anticipated revenues. Once we set the tax rate, all those anticipated revenues become the revenues that form the basis for our tax rate. So if tomorrow the state set a budget that said, hey, Milton, you get $1 million extra money, we haven't set our tax rate yet, so we can amend the budget to incorporate that money in. If we'd already set the tax rate, we wouldn't be able to change everything.
Isn't our tax rate just last year's rate plus 2.5%?
No, that's That's the maximum we're allowed to levy on
Yeah.
our residents.
Sure, but then divide that.
But it's factored by, the tax rate is factored by our budget. If we cut our budget $10 million, then the tax rates will be lower, even if we're allowed to increase the levy by 2.5% under the law. If we have $10 million more in local receipts than we anticipated, our tax rate would be lower because we have another source of income potentially to use. So all these factors come together to form that tax rate. In other communities where there's multiple additional sources of revenue that can also depress that tax rate than it might otherwise anticipate it to be.
But this reserve fund number that we're talking like at 250,000 was set as part of the FY24 budget
Correct.
that we did in the last iteration. So this money was put here arguably for a situation such as this money that we're talking about now.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Would we like to have a discussion about the wood chipper?
I do have one question.
Please.
Who's responsible for handling repairs for all this stuff? Anything that we buy, does it go up to a sub? Are we in a position to buy something like this and actually maintain it the way it's supposed to be maintained? Or how are we making sure that this money is, in 5 years, isn't gonna be needed again?
Sure. I'll let Chase speak to that. Chase, if you could just maybe touch broadly on how we manage our fleet across the town.
Sure, yeah, so all the equipment are maintained by the DPW, and the administrative vehicles are maintained by our 3 professional mechanics that work in what we call the central maintenance garage. So the majority of the work they do is on police and fire vehicles, and then DPW, just because of the numbers of how many vehicles there are. But they are mechanics full-time. That's what they do day in and day out.
Thank you.
Anything else? Is there a motion?
If I say it right, I make a motion that we transfer the reserve fund that was in for the purchase of a new wood chipper. What was the amount? 100.
Thank you.
110,000?
You know,
It's a very explicit number, 107, 130.
thank you. Right, it is. $107,135.
Or $107,130.
Is there a second? Karen, can you?
Yes.
Can you have access to the Zoom so you know who's online? Could you please conduct a roll call vote on the motion to transfer $107,135 from the reserve fund for purchase of a wood chipper by the DPW?
Sure.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with Tom Caldwell.
Here.
Lori Connolly,
Yes.
It's a vote.
Jay Fundling,
You voted present.
Yes.
Allison, I believe is online. Allison?
Yes.
And I think, do we have Julie Joyce there?
Yep, I'm here. And yes, thank you.
Okay. Timothy Lyons,
Yes.
JJ's online.
Yes.
Steve Ryan's online.
Yes.
Amanda
Yes.
and Ronald.
Yes.
And I thought we had Judy online, but she did decline my invitation to become a panelist. Let me just, and she's gone. So that's everybody.
Tom, would you?
And that's 10
Can I
yeses.
cast another vote? I voted present. I'd like to vote yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, so by my tally, this will go to the warrant committee. Recommended that's approval by a yes. And it's great. That's our first vote in this special town meeting. And I think it's great to give the DPW this wood chipper. I think we've all seen them out there in all, in rain, sleet, and snow with that chipper. So that will help the town. Okay, Mr. Milano, would you help guide us through some of the other articles that we're looking at for the special town meeting?
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chase. So I'll go through, I'll leave the two MBTA ones to the end. Just that takes a little bit longer to describe. So the warrant article we have, I just want to look at your agenda, so I'm using the same terminology. So transfer of land to the Conservation Commission. John Kieran and Arthur Doyle from the Conservation Commission attended a select board meeting earlier this year, pointed out that some property that had been taken by eminent domain by the town in the 1960s for the promotion and what is the phrase? Promotion and development of natural resources had not been transferred to the Conservation Commission. They requested the select board include an article in the warrant to transfer these parcels of land to conservation. If you looked at the materials that I posted online, you can see that this land is located on the Neponset. It's mostly salt marsh. It's two takings that reflect two pieces of land, but it's multiple parcels according to our GIS map. So if you looked at the GIS map, you might see additional labels, parcels. So it would basically take all of that land you see in that area, and all of it will be under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission if town meeting so votes. That's the background on that. Obviously, if there are more specific questions, I would defer to both John and Arthur and the rest of the Conservation Commission on that. But that has been approved by the select board to be included in the warrant in December.
Does anybody have any questions about that? Amanda?
So would it be considered, is it an oversight that it wasn't transferred, or is it asking for land? What's the why, I guess?
Well, it's a good question. I think I'll let Concom speak to some of it, but this land was acquired by eminent domain for these purposes.
Right.
So the select board can't go build on it just because it's under the select board's care, custody, and control. Those rules that were in the acquisition still apply to it. The Conservation Commission being an entity that cares for land broadly, expressed an interest in taking over responsibility for that. And plus, I don't know if there's anything on that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Conservation Commission's view is that the intention was that this land should have gone into conservation. I think that, I mean, they can speak for themselves, but I think that's probably what their view is. And Select Board, I don't think has any use for it.
Okay.
Conservation Commission, in my opinion, Select Board hasn't voted on it, but my opinion is probably a better steward of that land than the Select Board is.
Thank you.
Sure. We spoke briefly about the warrant article to amend the fiscal 2024 budget. I described that, so I won't speak to that anymore at this point. Happy to take questions, of course. A bylaw to require recording and posting of meetings of elected public bodies. A resident came to the select board with this proposal as an idea for consideration of the select board. The select board was open to the idea. We did reach out to the elected public bodies at that time to get some of their feedback. So the idea is that some of our boards and committees meetings are recorded and posted by Milton Access TV, not all of them. This bylaw does not propose to make all boards and committees subject to that. It's just the elected ones. So school committee, select board, planning board, I'm missing one, are usually recorded and the balance are not. this bylaw would require each of those elected public bodies to be to record their meetings. Obviously, there's a technical component to this, and we do at this point have the technology to easily record meetings. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be Milton Access quality, but it's a means that's available with equipment that the town already owns. So the technical piece would not be a heavy lift in terms of where the meetings would go once recorded. Currently, Milton Access TV will post any meeting that we record and we give to them on their YouTube page. If you've been on there lately, every time you go on there, it's like they're adding another meeting from 2011 or something. So there's a huge library of meetings if you're interested, and they will load everything that we want. So the goal under the proposed bylaw, if approved by town meeting, would be that all of those elected public bodies would record their meeting, get the recording data over to Milton Access TV. They would post it on their YouTube page within a couple of weeks. So that's the broad strokes behind it. I know that a couple of the boards have reached out since then to express their perspective on it. So we'll get that information to you as well as we go forward here. But that's kind of the big picture. The draft of the bylaw was in the materials that I provided. So happy to take any questions on that as we go along here. The local historic district bylaw. The town set up a local historic district study committee, which is a required first step in order to set up a local historic district. A local historic district is something allowed under Massachusetts general law, which says this distinct part of town is historic for these reasons, and the structures and buildings in this area should keep those kinds of materials, that kind of look, that kind of architecture, and new buildings should reflect this kind of look, this kind of architecture going forward. That's a very high level take on it. The local historic district study committee has spent quite some time looking at options in town. They settled on a local historic district that would be in Milton Village. They produced quite a lengthy report that they submitted to the Massachusetts Historical Commission. As part of the process, Mass Historic reviews what they've created, makes some comments, and then basically signs off on it saying you've met the goals under the law. So that report was in the materials I sent out. There is a map that shows the districts. It's a little bit of, it's Adams, Elliott, High, a little up to Canton, and inclusive of Wharf Street. And there's also a bylaw proposal as part of this. In order to set up a local historic district, you have to have a bylaw to that effect. That also establishes a local historic district committee. And the bylaw sets out the rules on the local historic district, as well as who serves on this local historic district committee going forward, or commission, what the membership is, who the appointing authority is, what the length of the terms are. So all that is in there. Larry Lawfer is the chair of the local historic district study committee. He'd be the contact to describe that in more detail. This has gone to the planning board. They have spoken generally in support of having this, and it has been voted for inclusion in the warrant in December by the town meeting. By the select board.
And when you say that they've been working on it for some time, I mean, that's like 3 or 4 years of some time. There's substantial work has gone into this to get it to this point. So they have put a lot of work into getting this to the annual, or to our special town meeting here.
And they have engaged with the public at different times throughout that. And then as part of this process, they do have to have a public hearing where they send out a notice to all the property owners in the district. And just because of the way the bureaucracy is set up, that can't happen until a certain time point after they've submitted this to Mass Historic. So basically there will be a public hearing where every building owner, property owner in that district gets a notification of the public hearing, but that won't happen until the first week of November. So there has been engagement. There will continue to be engagement on this going forward. And what they've presented is their recommendation for the bylaw and for the district.
So is the timeline for the Mass Historic to approve it or disapprove it November? Is that what is that?
They have already done that.
Oh,
they met in September, and they've already given Mr. Lawford their feedback and go ahead.
Gotcha. So
And the
what's
planning board
the,
as well.
so then what's the November time?
That's another public hearing required under the.
It has to be a certain amount of
Yeah,
time
and this
after.
one
Okay.
explicitly has to be for people affected by the district boundaries.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, this is one that will take work by the planning board, and the select board really deferred to the planning board in terms of whether we would have it in December or wait until May. The study committee has been working very hard, and they're very interested in having it done in December. And then the planning board voted, as I understand it from the chair, the planning board voted that they wanted to go forward with it in December. So that's why the select board has voted to include it as well. We thought there was a lot on the planning board's plate, so we wanted to defer to them, but they want to go forward with it. So we voted to include it on the warrant.
We did receive a citizen's petition with the required number of signatures. Excuse me. So under Massachusetts general law, any citizens can bring a petition to be heard by the town meeting. For the annual, I think it requires 10 signatures. For any special town meeting, it requires 100 signatures. So the folks involved in this had well over 100 signatures, so it was certified by the town clerk. The citizen's petition proposes to transfer a piece of land, Pope's Pond, from to the Conservation Commission. So that has been drafted and presented to the select board. So under the law, my understanding that will just go on the warrants. And I let you folks know who the contact is for that. So if there's any follow up there, I'll just note that transfer was voted upon at Article 31 at the May 2023 town meeting. So we have apprised town council of this, so they can take a look at that for us and provide any feedback. We'll share that when we receive it as well. Other potential articles, catch-all. The school building committee voted last week to request an additional appropriation for the ongoing school project costs of $400,000 at the May 2023 town meeting. Article 33 appropriated $275,000 to the school building committee for the school projects. They're requesting an additional appropriation of $400,000. They had a meeting last week to do that, so that will be presented to the select board. Select board has closed the warrant, but may open it if they vote to do so and accept additional articles in. If that happens, we will follow up with you and obviously connect you to Mr. O'Rourke to have a discussion about that appropriation.
Do we have any sense of where that money would come from? Or is that too early to ask?
So free cash has been certified, so it would be an appropriation from free cash.
But didn't we already allocate all that free cash?
That was last year's free cash. So that was going to be part of my budget update is,
Okay, I'm very confused.
Yes, so in Massachusetts, big picture, if you have more revenues than you anticipate, you have lower expenses than you anticipate, and Amy will throw a lot of caveats at that. Raw calculation, all that money closes out to what is called free cash. Town meeting may then appropriate from free cash for various expenses. Typically, you'll see those appropriations at a May town meeting, but anytime after it is certified by the Department of Revenue, you may appropriate it. In the intervening time period where free cash ends June 30th of a fiscal year, it does not exist until it's certified again. So that could be 6 months, it could be 9 months, it could be, in this case, 3 months, where we don't have a certified free cash value. The Department of Revenue on Friday certified the town's free cash at $3.3 million. It was 4.4 last year and historically fluctuates between $2 and $3 million. So now, as part of, now that it's certified, town meeting can appropriate from it if it chooses to do so. So that's the rule, how that applies.
Are you saying that's the expectation of from 3 months ago, July 1st of 2023 to 9 months from now, June 30th, 2024?
It's always a year behind. So this, it's everything that closed as part of fiscal year 23. So the fiscal year ended June 30th.
That makes a lot more sense then.
Well, I think in that base rhythm is normal. To have it certified end of September, middle of October is more typical, where the last 2 years it was certified in February of 23 for fiscal 20 for our current year.
So in
And the
February,
year before that was May. So that was really, really late.
so in February of 23, we learned how much money we had
From a year
July
later.
1st, 22.
Right. June 30th, 22.
Okay, I totally misunderstood that. Yeah, thank you.
No, and this,
Thank you.
if you look back at our history in the Department of Revenue posted, it's, September, October, November, November. And then it's the last couple of years with various transitions that was later than usual. So we're hopeful to keep to this moving forward, and that is going to be our goal. And it's really valuable and good information to have at this time of the year as we think about our budget moving forward. It's a little bit trickier when we're waiting for it, and we certainly want to be in this part of the world on it. I think so. I have this catch-all for other potential articles only because it does tie into the MBTA communities. The planning board has discussed potentially having an article. Members of the planning board have talked about having an article. Under other potential articles, I just wanted to put that out there. So that brings us to MBTA communities, and I'll try to do a really big picture overall understanding of what the process has been and where things stand to date. So the legislature approved MBTA communities a few years ago, and since then, the planning department, planning board, select board have been engaged on what this will mean for Milton up until now, knowing that we have a December 2023 deadline if the town is going to comply with that deadline. Milton is one of 13 to 14 communities in the rapid transit category that has to comply by December of 23. The rest of the communities in this MBTA communities law have to comply by December of 2024. In order to meet that December of 23 deadline, there's a town meeting scheduled for December 4th, as you know, and the select board has brought an article forward for the planning board's consideration and for town meetings consideration that complies with the MBTA Communities Act. If you look back a couple of weeks ago to the September 5th meeting of the select board, you can see in our packet what that warrant article looked like. That warrant article is not set in stone, and the select board's made it clear that they are open to changes, feedback, improvements, suggestions from the planning board as this goes through the process and heads towards town meeting. And over the past month, that's really what's happened. The planning board has had meetings to talk about it. They haven't voted on it. I don't want to make it sound like this is something they support because that hasn't been a vote. But there has been feedback at the planning board level that is changing the original proposal from the select board. And the select board has voted already to incorporate some of those changes that the planning board has brought forward and through the planning and through their consultants and through the planning director, changes to the initial article. So the original article was approved on September 5th by the select board. At our last meeting, the select board accepted some improvements to that article and changes to that article, and has indicated that it will take up potential changes as well. The planning board at the same time has continued to work on this issue. There have been different discussions at the planning board as to the direction for MBTA communities for Milton. So I don't want to categorize those in any way that, just to say that they have, unlike the select board has voted on something specific, they haven't. They've been providing feedback and thoughts on things to date. They have another meeting this week. And I'll just note that select board met at the end of September, and even since that meeting, there have been some changes to where the planning board discussions have gone that may be taken back up at the select board as well. So there is planning board met last week, planning board's meeting again this week, select board meets next week. So that's just to say that as this continues to go through the process, the select board has been open and has been incorporating the direction that things have been presented at the planning board to on the recommendation of the planning director and on the direction and recommendation of our consultants as well.
Just to be specific about that, the select board voted last Tuesday to update the article based on the feedback. And my understanding is that there was more feedback last Thursday at the planning board. And my anticipation is that when the select board meets next Tuesday, the select board will take up that additional feedback and may well include that additional feedback. I hope and expect the select board will include that additional feedback, and I expect based on what's happened in the past that it will, but hasn't yet, so.
And work is ongoing. The planning board does have a consultant, RKG, that has been brought on to do a fiscal impact analysis. They did a very high level introduction and preview of some of the work they've been doing at the most recent planning board meeting. They'll be back once they finish their analysis. And I think those are the two things I wanted to mention. So there are two articles on the listing related to this MBTA communities. The first is the baseline article that we've been talking about here. The second is an amendment for requiring mixed use in the Milton Central Station subdistrict. So one of the things that's come out of these discussions has been that under the original layout of the article, residential would be allowed use in the Milton and Central subdistrict. One thing you lose when you do that is a requirement that there be mixed use or commercial use on the first floor. And the reason it had not been incorporated up until now is that the state has said that was not allowed. Under MBTA communities, you couldn't require mixed use. You have to allow only residential use as of right, and get credit for it. The state has changed their guidelines a bit to open the door on mixed use. So the direction that planning director and the consultant have looked at is, okay, if we can do this, we should take advantage of it. And where should we apply that? And they want to apply it in Milton Village, it'd be residential as of right on floors 2 and above, but it would require a commercial use or another kind of use on that first floor. So that's a separate warrant article to that effect. And so there are two. It is possible that it could be just one article, but we're still walking through the processes on that and working with the state on how that would be set up. And it's a little bit of a curveball because of the way the compliance guidelines that the state set out had not allowed this for some time, and now they do. So it's partly working through how to set it up appropriately so that whatever is approved by town meeting or voted upon by town meeting would be a compliant district at the end of the day.
So Granite Ave and East Milton wouldn't have mixed use, just the Lowell Mills area?
It would be allowed, but it wouldn't be required. So that's the distinction there. And on the East Milton side of things is the planning board has also been working on an overlay district for East Milton that would allow for denser uses through a special permit that would be issued by the planning board. And they view that ultimately, if a developer were interested in East Milton, the most likely route for them to go to develop in East Milton would be through the special permit process rather than anything set up for MBTA communities. So that's why if kind of weighing where to put this, preference was given to Milton and Central.
Go ahead, you first. I had a question about the MBTA, the development and the builders. To me, it seems like this is very much they're pushing to get as many people as possible on public transportation and to get the cars off the streets. But is there anything that's going to be required from the builders or the owners or the renters for these new developments, so they cannot register and insure a car out of that address? So we make sure that all that development is really sort of utilized and going towards the red line, which is what they're doing. Anything that's transit oriented, it's supposed to be not to add a ton of traffic, which obviously we're all choked by every day. So is there any sort of thought to that to make sure that anything that is transit oriented that's being built for that is going to be able to sort of respect that and not be adding to?
I can't answer that question right now. I can certainly get back to you on that.
That'd be great. I'd appreciate that.
Just kind of unrelated, but there is parking requirements in the article that's been brought forward, which would require a minimum of, would require one parking space per unit.
So they're expecting these people to all have cars?
Correct. But the other component to that is also that parking takes up space. So it's a way of limiting too much growth in any particular parcel as well. So it comes from both sides too.
And that's the draft article that requires the 1 space per unit right now. That's one of the things that is part of the article.
So from a timing standpoint, and I don't know who would answer this, what's sort of the drop dead date for it to be finished so that it comes to us and we have time to?
Yeah, and that's been a concern expressed at the select board, that you all have enough time to review it. So you have an article that's been voted, updated as of last Tuesday. We expect some updates that we'll be able to consider for next Tuesday. My hope is that that's it. I think it's fair to say that that it's a long article, right? It's a very long article. It's about 20 some odd pages long. This isn't, they're not wholesale changes at this point. They're, massaging and modifications and getting the feedback from the consultants and from the planning board to try to make those modifications. And we hope and expect that we'll get more from the planning board. I can't speak for the board. The board hasn't spoken on when's the drop dead date. The warrant is closed. But my hope is that on October 10th, which is our next meeting, that then we'll have a final for you all. Can't promise that because the planning board may want to give more input, and I think we should give them as much time as possible to do that. But it's a balance because you all need as much time as possible too. So it's a little bit up in the air depending on what the planning board does. But my hope is, you have something now, and again, I think going forward, it's going to be massaging and changing some of the things in that article. But my hope is that we get something as soon as we can that's in final form for you all to review.
Casco, follow up. Is there, just having listened to the different meetings, is there a potential that there would be 2 separate articles of the same? Like, would there be a potential for an alternative version of an MBTA article that's...
Well, that would be up to the select board.
Okay.
Select board decides what goes on the warrant, so that would be up to the select board.
Okay.
You guys got a response on the letter that you sent to the state?
So we sent 2. We got a response to the first one. The first one said, tell us why we're rapid transit, and we don't think we're rapid transit, and we should be classified the way we used to be, not rapid transit. They came back and said, well, it's a technical requirement under the federal guidelines. That's why you're rapid transit. They also went into a paragraph about the MBTA Communities Act, which we didn't even ask about in our letter. They just went into it for some reason. They started going into the MBTA Communities Act and said, well, look, that's the definition. While the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which promulgates the guidelines for the MBTA Communities Act, while they take some they take our definitions for rapid transit, it's really their decision. It's really housing and but that letter also made clear that the Milton trolley or the Mattapan trolley that goes in Milton is really a separate line. And so that prompted us to send a second letter. This time, the first letter went to MBTA because they define what is rapid transit. That prompted us to write to Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities because MBT said they decide ultimately, right? We said, well, you need to clarify this for us because while we're in the appendix of the guidelines and says Milton is required to add 2,461 units in the appendix, if you go to the definitions under the guidelines, the Mattapan trolley really isn't covered under the definitions because the definitions say, and I'm not to get too far into the weeds, but the definitions say it's got to be a MBTA community with one or more subway stations. And then they define subway stations as red, green, blue, or orange line, or one that is under construction and will be online, or an extension to one of those. And, our letter said, well, that doesn't include the Mattapan trolley, so you need to clarify that. And for that, we asked for a response by October 6th, and we haven't received a response that I'm aware of as yet.
Allison has her hand up. Allison, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm not there in person. I just had a question about the plan because the select board had voted for the plan that was the tiered transit that include an additional 650 units. Is that to be anticipated to change in the article? And if, because it looks like when it was attached, we had the other map. I'm just want to make sure that we're understanding kind of what plan and how many units and like what, if you could maybe display the map that you're anticipating or if you plan on changing it.
So it should be the map that we voted last Tuesday. That should be the one that you all have. And I don't know that has been massaged. I don't know what the planning board did on Thursday. I don't know whether the feedback was to massage the map at all. I think they wanted to massage some of the size and unit requirements, but I don't know if the feedback is to change the map. So the answer is we voted an updated map last Tuesday, and I don't know as I sit here now whether we'll get more feedback for an updated map next Tuesday.
Okay, then just a follow-up question. You had the consultant's information after the vote. So do you anticipate changing your response given the information from the consultants in your next meeting?
Well, again, I don't want to speak for what the board does, but last Tuesday, the board took a favorable view of the initial feedback from the planning board and the consultant. So I anticipate that the select board will do that again. And so whatever the feedback is from the planning board's meeting last Thursday and then the planning board's meeting this coming Thursday, my hope and expectation is that the board will take that feedback.
And I'll recognize you in a second, Tim, but I'm just going to jump on that a little bit. Like what Mr. Zulus is describing here is a really fluid process. And this, as I would encourage you one more time, everyone in the Warrant Committee and in the town at large to watch these meetings carefully because they're happening like now. There's MBTA zoning tomorrow. And then I'm sure that the planning board meeting on Thursday is going to be a major meeting. So like Mr. Zulus, it's fair that he can say, I don't know. Sometimes that's the best answer you can give because it's not, you can't be up to speed on every little tweak to every district of the 3 overlays that the planning board is using. Thank you for that, Tim.
If the, whatever the acronym is for, if they say we're not rapid transit anymore, can we unwind stuff? And then we have to go back and redo all the maps again for lower density?
Yeah, so hypothetically, if we weren't a rapid transit community, that would change the numbers and it would also change the timing. The timing, right. But we don't know that's going to be the response. But presumably if the numbers change, then the timing would change because that seems to go hand in hand. But you can't speak for a state agency.
Right. Go ahead.
And do we know if any other communities have pushed back and gotten anywhere from, I know Marshfield was putting up a stink about this, and I've heard a few other communities were too, but do we know if anybody's been successful?
So back in the spring, Brookline sought some relief on timing and definitions, and I don't believe they've gotten any relief on that. So I'm not aware of any communities that have received any relief.
The other thing to keep in mind is right now it's the 14 really inner communities. So 160 more communities will be dealing with this next year. So it may be quiet, but that's because some folks haven't really dived as deep into it as Milton has to date. There have been a couple of communities, or rather one that has already approved something. But for the most part, it's, I think Dedham did this too. So at least a few that have already approved something. Yeah, Lexington and Dedham, I think, are the two. So it might be something everybody's really targeting for the annual next year. So we're on slightly different time horizon as us, just also in terms of their planning efforts, not just the advocacy side of things.
Jay.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a couple of process questions. One thing, so for zoning articles, I don't fully understand, but I think like there is a process for zoning articles they have to go through. They have to have a public hearing or multiple public hearings.
Yes,
Is that correct?
Oh,
a zoning article requires a public hearing by the planning board, and there's a timeline after which it's submitted to the board that it has to have that public hearing, and then the planning board is allowed a timeline to basically make a report on that. So then they have 3 weeks essentially after the public hearing to make a report on their view on the zoning article. So that there is 2 timelines in there.
Okay, so I mean, I'm wondering about our role. So if it comes to us, and if we have feedback that then goes back to whoever submitted it, be it the select board or the planning board, and that feedback changes it, would that throw this whole thing? Like, would there need to be another public hearing? I just don't know. I'm trying to understand the process and our role, our potential role on it.
So I'll take this one. The public hearing has to do with the article.
Okay.
So presumably any feedback from the public hearing and hopefully from the warrant committee would be considered at that point. But it would still be the same article, and it may be tweaked and adjusted. But if it's the same article and the same proposal, I don't think it starts the clock again.
So then I'm picturing the article printed in the warrant, the first one printed, the not bold type, would be unchanged. But hypothetically, if we have feedback, we give it, go back and forth with the planning board, that feedback leads to changes, then the bold recommendation could potentially be changed.
It's happened before.
Yeah, I've seen the end result. I've seen where you have 8 pages of one thing and you have 8 more pages that are ever so slightly different.
Right.
I just don't know how we get there.
Yeah.
So that would
it's
be
painstaking.
yeah, I'm trying to figure out the process. So, and I don't know if anyone in this room wants to be writing zoning regulations. So it would be potentially us giving feedback to the town planner, the planning board, the select board, somebody, and saying, we would like these changes, potentially.
And I'll speak to that in particular. You mentioned writing it. So what we've asked Tim Zerwinski, the Director of Planning at Community Development, I think if that's his title. So Tim, anyway. So when he prepared, I had requested him to put together a bylaw essentially to reflect compliance here. The state has put out a model bylaw, so we are using that. We didn't create something bespoke or in any way. We wanted to follow what the state put out, what the Attorney General's office has seen and commented on. So we're following that. So the changes are maybe like the lot size in a district. It's not zoning verbiage so much. Now there are things that could be added to that. But for right now, we followed the model bylaw to try to keep it with a pretty straightforward and standard language. And there's places in that's easy to see kind of the big pieces that might be up for debate. Lot size being one line, or number of units on a lot being kind of those big elements that go into and shape the entire compliance or non-compliance.
And I think process-wise, if we have an article, the anywhere where this committee departs from the article would be in the recommendation. So you might have a different recommendation, for example, on lot size or on certain design requirements. So that would go into your recommendation. So that would be, if that differed at all from the actual article.
Okay. Can I ask another process question? Do we know if this will be a town meeting majority vote or a 2/3 vote?
So the guidelines differ different parts of it. If it's the part near the transit area, it's a majority vote. If it's away from a certain part away from the transit area, it's 2/3. The select board voted to seek a waiver for those areas that are a part of this plan that are within that corridor, to have that majority as well, because apparently the state agency is open to those kind of waivers. And so the select board voted to seek a waiver for those areas, for certain areas that were part of potential areas that the planning board had been considering. One was up on Randolph Ave. That's no longer a consideration, but the one was up on Randolph Ave, and I think the other area is on Adams Street. On Granite Ave. I'm sorry, on Granite Ave. And so it may be majority vote, or it may be 2/3, depending on what the state says. The mixed use piece of it is 2/3. So the way the warrant is structured right now, you have an article that would bring the town into compliance, the residential piece, and then the mixed use piece is really a separate part, right? It's saying, okay, well, if you're compliant with the residential piece, do you want to do something different on the mixed use piece? And that's a 2/3 vote. So then the town meeting would have the opportunity to decide if it wants to add, if it votes in favor of the residential piece, which it may or may not, if it wants to add the mixed use piece, the commercial piece, which again, it may or may not.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. So if the mixed use, if the board, whichever board, wanted to include mixed use in Milton and just Central, could you not put that in your main article as part of your article, if you're going to require it? Just
in the MBTA article?
in the MBTA article?
Oh, you mean in the article seeking compliance?
Correct.
The residential
Yeah, the
piece.
2461.
I guess you could. I mean, it's really 2 separate things. I mean, you have the commercial, you have the residential piece that really ensures compliance, and then you have the mixed use piece, which is commercial. And this is much like what Brookline has done. Brookline has as I understand it, they have two different pieces of their article: one that ensures compliance and one that allows some additional changes beyond that. So that's the way that we have it set up here, where you can get compliance with this article, and then if you want to do the commercial, if the town meeting wants to do the commercial, you could do that as well.
Okay. And the second question is the 2461. If you did all of that within the half mile, it would be a simple majority.
If you do it within the half mile, it would be a simple majority. Yes. I think that's right.
It's kind of, so the state a few years ago changed the law broadly for multifamily housing. If there's a zoning article to change multifamily housing, it changed the quantum of vote required from 2/3 to majority.
Right.
The caveat being that there's language that has to be in an eligible location. Then eligible location is defined as close to transit, so that gives you the half mile transit.
Right.
A commercial district, so that covers East Milton. And then there's other language that says, close to good transportation, underutilized buildings, underutilized sites. So there's broadly, it's majority if it's in an eligible location. And that's where, as Mr. Zulus indicated, if it was, for the most part, where all of this has been going is within the transit area. But some of the Granite Ave, if you see on the map, the circles indicate the transit area, some of it's out. So we have submitted a request for an advisory opinion from the state to say, we think this is an eligible location for these reasons, and the state will come back with what their opinion on it is. That's kind of where things have been on that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Lori?
It's more of a process question. So the warrant's closed. What what's the thought process around opening? Like when would you open the warrant versus not opening the warrant?
It's a good question.
And then when do you really close the warrant?
It's a good question. You know, I look at it personally as, I mean, it's art. It's not science, I think. You know, I think it in terms of what's reasonable. What's reasonable for this committee, what's reasonable for town meeting, what's reasonable for the select board. And so is it, you know, in this one, this has been a discussion that's been going on for a long time. I could certainly see reopening the warrant to adjust and update an article. You know, on the school building committee, you know, whether that's reasonable, you know, I think it's a very individual idea. And to me, it has to do with timing. You know, at some point you have to, someone said it, you know, at some point you have to cut it and say, this is it. And also you have to provide the residents the opportunity to say, okay, if you get an article in by the 26th, which is when we closed it, which is what those residents did, it's going to be on the warrant. Because the select board has no say if it's a citizen's petition. Select board has no say at all. It goes on the warrant. But you have to set a date so everybody knows if you get it in by this date, you'll have it. And if you don't, you don't. So that's a long way of saying we'll see what the select board does. We'll see what the select board does, right?
I love that.
Yeah. But I think there's I think it's fair to say that, you know, the select board wants to give this committee plenty of time and opportunity to do its work and doesn't want to load everyone down at the last minute. You know, this is a little bit of a unusual one this fall. So it may require us to all work a little bit harder and a little bit later. But I think the select board wants to give you all plenty of time to do what you need to do.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that we do.
Can someone provide us the current version? Because, I mean, somebody said September 5th, but then somebody else said.
The 26th is the latest. That's the latest
The
one.
materials that I sent out
I'm sure I
includes
can
that language.
The materials you sent out.
There's a link on the website.
22nd?
There's a link to the warrant. If you go to the warrant committee website, I created sorry. So everybody knows. Let me rephrase. Restart. So last year we had used a OneDrive link, and I think there are some issues with that. So I have changed how I will try to get everybody on this committee materials at the same time. So website, boards and committees, warrant committee page. On the left-hand side, there's a link to warrant committee meeting materials. Brings us to our document center, and then I'll start loading everything in there. So everything for October 2nd today is in there currently. And I will continue to provide updates if the select board takes action next Tuesday. I'll get something. I might have to restructure how I do this because it won't be tied to a warrant committee meeting, but we'll do something and we'll get it on here. Maybe it'll be an MBTA community subfolder, so you can find everything kind of in one spot.
But the draft article that was written is in the select board.
There's a
meeting
Wi-Fi.
packet.
Oh, good point. Yeah, everything's
So,
also.
Jay, you can get it there
Say again?
in the select board meeting packet from September 5th.
It's just so big.
Oh, the 26th, September 26th.
Oh, then
It was
is
the
there
updated
an
one.
updated? Okay.
Well, they are. It's like one PDF that's
Well, it
150
is.
pages, and
It's
you can't even search by.
420.
They do that.
I'm lazy. Lazy.
Well, you just have to scroll through and find it.
Well, we'll get everything on this town webpage too, just going forward.
You just have to scroll through. We have to read it.
Do you have to?
Yes, they all have to.
Yes. Yes. The answer is yes.
I have people for that kind of thing. All right. I'm told that we don't have any hands up in the internets. So are there any other questions? Thank you for this detailed
Dave, Allison just raised her hand. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes, Allison.
I was told that the September 26th doesn't have the most recent amended with the correct plan. Is that correct? Can we just make sure? And if you wouldn't mind sending it or updating it so that because I just went to go look online But I was told that it didn't have the most recent up-to-date information.
We will take a look and we'll distribute that.
And the plan was incorrect as well. So if, you had voted in the meeting to modify it, and so it wasn't updated.
Yeah, I'll take a look and replace that or just add it as a separate one as well.
That would be great. Thank you. Yeah, because that's what I was talking about, the difference in the plans versus the transit triplex versus the tiered transit. It appears that you have the wrong map that you guys had voted on.
I'll take a look for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. Look forward to an awesome special town meeting. I think that concludes our business that we had on the agenda. Basically, planning for purposes of moving forward for our warrant committee. I mean, at this point, I've distributed all those dates. I think let's plan on next Monday. I'll reach out to people. We'll start coming up with a manageable plan to start working through articles, doing votes.
When's the next planning board meeting?
Thursday. This Thursday. They're on a cycle. There's Thursday.
Anyway.
I don't think that's a good practice. So that'll be whatever the next date was. Maybe it was a Wednesday. We should get going.
Yeah.
Right, whatever the next date was, I'll start putting something together. And then we will need to be prepared potentially for those rapid fire. I think it was a couple of weeks where it's like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, as the need may be. That's sort of designed to accept. If MBTA blows up on us, we have a place for it to blow up into, right? And then we go from there. Because it's possible, we want to do everything that we can in order to meet, our publication deadline for the warrant, which is somewhere, let's just call it end of October. In there somewhere, there's a secret date that we're not supposed to know what the secret date is. Yeah, it's right. I mean, we want to operate under the assumption that we're going to get this done and have something in the warrant, right? A recommendation in the warrant for a town meeting. But it is also possible that we do go into November. So we're just going to have to be flexible and communicate among ourselves and with the other boards. Right? Great. Anything else, Tom? No. Is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Is it a second? Does anyone object? No. Unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks.